everything could be aided by AI. And all of a sudden, you could get the results without putting in the effort, which sounds like too good to be true. But like we've seen what AI can do, right? There's all these like records being set, companies reaching tens of millions, in some cases in the hundreds of millions, but like on small teams, right? It's just kind of like bending the reality for me. But we're going to talk about the absolute highest ROI things that we could possibly come up with during this meeting. And like that kind of thing is now possible because of AI.
Welcome to Artificial Insights, where we talk to leaders and thinkers in AI about how to do AI right. I'm your host, Daniel Maneri, and this is Season 4 on the podcast. Here, we sit down every other Friday with people who build things with and write things about AI and talk to them about what they do and why they do it. Today, I'm joined by Aydin Mirzaee. Aydin is the CEO and co-founder of Fellow.ai, a meeting assistant that supports organizations before, during, and after every meeting. Prior to Fellow, he co-founded Fluidware, which was acquired by SurveyMonkey, where he served as general manager of SurveyMonkey Canada. Aydin is also the co-founder of Fresh Founders, a nonprofit organization with a vision to foster a community of top entrepreneurs in Canada. And he's also the host of This New Way, an AI-focused show that explores how leaders from all industries are embracing change and transforming the way they work. Aydin, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Aydin, co-founder and CEO at Fellow. So Fellow is an AI meeting assistant. What that means is that it's this agent that joins all the meetings in your company. It's almost like a digital employee. You hire Fellow, it goes to all the meetings in your company, tracks all the notes and the actions and the decisions. It brings you insights. It holds everybody accountable, right? It's like a collaborative platform. So the idea is that everyone's really on the same page about what was decided, what the action items were, who's going to do what. And it just makes your company more organized. It helps you prepare for meetings, right? So before you walk into a meeting, everybody's on the same page about what the agenda is, and it makes it really easy for you to create those things and to collaborate on them, run super efficient meetings, and then track the outcomes afterwards. And the other thing that is really interesting and that AI has enabled us to do with this product is like this really good, we kind of think of Fellow as this AI chief of staff. And so what it does is it also allows you to tap into insights across your company, right? So because it's almost like a chat GPT for your meetings. And one of the things that we like to say is that there's more context and more data in your meetings than any other data source within your company. So it allows you to do things like search across all of your meetings and basically ask all sorts of questions. So you might be able to say something like, what are all the bottlenecks in my engineering team? And of the last, 30 customer calls, what were the top 3 objections that customers brought up? Or, I've been doing one-on-ones with this employee for the past year. Can you write me a performance review based on all the feedback I gave them during these one-on-one sessions, right? So it's like this, that's kind of like the vision that we're building towards, is this AI chief of staff. And it's this really, it's a product we're really proud of. I think every organization in the world should have an AI chief of staff, and that's what we're trying to build with Fellow.
That's super cool. And I've actually used Fellow before it had any AI features and just was like a meeting assistant, essentially. Before I dig into that, with a podcast like this, Aydin, there's, I think, a question that's on everyone's minds, which is, Aydin, are you an AI?
Am I an AI? No, I'm not. But more and more of my functions are AI driven, for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, like I said, Fellow, something I used before it was AI driven, and I'd love to hear like that journey, like starting from I take my notes, I prepare for my meetings, all the way to like being able to ask for a performance review. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So, it's a very good question. So, Fellow, the first version of Fellow and the one that you experienced was originally launched in 2019, right? So that was, call it like V1. And there were some iterations to it, but by and large, it was what we call a meeting productivity platform. And so what that means is all the things that you just mentioned. It just allowed you to prep for meetings, run the meetings, do the follow-ups. But the problem with it was that everything was manual. And it made it a lot easier. So what happened was that if you were a super organized person, and Daniel, I don't know if you are or not, but if you were a super organized person, you loved Fellow. Like, this was the greatest thing you'd ever encountered, because using this thing, you could stay on top of your meetings and stay organized and keep everybody else organized and accountable. And it was amazing, and it brought you the best results. But what we found was that only about 15% of people within a company were in that super organized category, and the rest weren't. So when we would talk to them about Fellow, they'd say, "Oh yeah, that seems amazing, but we want the results. We just don't want to do the work." Yeah. And so we always had this was a friction point, in building this company. Like, this was our mission, was to help companies run better, be more efficient, create more accountability, do all these nice things for companies. But the product that we built just had this characteristic about it, right? You had to be motivated to want to put in the effort to get the results. And that could work, right? Because if you get a whole company and you get like those 10, 15% to really buy in, they kind of drag in everybody else.
I tried to do that actually. Like I tried to run my team through Fellow and be like, here's all of our meetings, fill these out beforehand. And you're right, it was hard sometimes with the people who really didn't like to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So this was kind of like where we were at, right? And then all of a sudden, AI building blocks come to the mix. They become accessible. People start using ChatGPT, and we start to think about what that might mean for meetings. And it turns out that AI has a lot of use cases, but in particular for meetings, it's one of the most obvious, like the first things that you want to use AI for is for meetings. And so all of a sudden, we saw that this was really going to have an effect on how we would build this product and what it would be about. And really, like, the reason that I got excited about it was because we always had that problem of this relies on those 15% super organized people. But all of a sudden with AI, all those things that those 15% people had to do could be automated. So all the prep, all the running the meeting, the follow-ups, everything could be aided by AI. And all of a sudden, you could get the results without putting in the effort, which sounds like too good to be true. But like, we've seen what AI can do, right? And so our view was like, okay, our mission hasn't changed, but because of AI, we can now make our product that much better, deliver like that much more outcome and that much more results. And I think like for anyone, it would be a no-brainer, right? Because the value prop all of a sudden is like more broadly applicable. So that was kind of the promise of it. And, I kind of liken it to, many of the technological revolutions that we've had, right? Like, new platform shifts arrive, and then that means that you can build better products, right? Some products would not be possible without, say like an Uber is not really possible without the mobile moment, but other technologies can like really expand. So one of the ones, for example, that I think about is, social networks like Facebook, that you'd have to be behind a computer and behind your desk. But now, like on a mobile phone, you can have it all the time. So it kind of just increases the usefulness of whatever platform. And I think AI was very much like that for our product, in that now that we had these tools in the toolkit, the type of product we could build would be so much better and we could do so much more. And so that was kind of like the promise of it. And of course, like, that sounds really good. And then there's all the practicality of like, how do you pivot your entire company to go from like one thing to something completely different?
Yeah, I really liked how you said that there was that moment that it occurred to you that there could be something so much more useful because of AI. So when did that happen? How did you come to this? Let's rebuild our company to be AI first.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't immediate. Like, we started playing with this stuff and we suffered from a whole bunch of biases, right? I attribute the biases towards having done something for a few years, right? Building this product in a few years. And so it wasn't necessarily apparent like how we would apply AI. I mean, you can basically use AI to build all sorts of things. So what do you go ahead and build? And I think in the very early days, one of the things that I originally started thinking was, well, AI can summarize meetings, right? Like, you can record a meeting and you can summarize meetings, and that's cool. But you could always record and summarize meetings before, right? And so really, if you, we came up with one of these phrases, which was like, if you record and summarize a meeting, it was still a meeting. And so, Fellow is more about making sure that the meeting, first of all, the right meetings happen and they're run super effectively. And so It's all about starting even before the meeting happens. And so
Mm.
originally, that's what we started to think. And as time progressed, what we realized in our customer base was like the biggest pain point in meetings was, and the one that everybody could just get behind from the get go, was just the note taking aspect, like just the basics of, I want someone to take notes in my meeting. I want them to summarize, hold people accountable, track the actions and decisions over time. And that was the thing that, in talking to our customers, they wanted the most. And it almost got to a point where, like, who wants to write their own notes? And just to be dramatic, who wants to write their own notes like a loser? Like, who does that anymore in 2025? And so that's kind of where things were shifting. And so when we kind of saw that, and in talking to our customers and seeing that our customers were still using Fellow, but they were using Fellow in parallel with other startups that were kind of like doing this kind of basically like the automated note taking, we realized, like, yeah, this is something that we need to holistically do. Like, Fellow can't just be meeting prep. And the thing that Fellow does is it's a holistic platform. It's the before, during, and after. And so it did take us a bit of time to kind of realize like where we wanted to take the product. And again, like some of it with customers, some of it kind of realizing that the way that people are meeting is changing. But yeah, we explored a bunch of different opportunities, and we kind of realized that like we just need to own the whole stack before, during, and after. And so we have to be involved in all areas.
Yeah. The note taking one seems like the ubiquitous one to me as well. But it sounded like you had a deep customer insight from working with them for years of people have a hard time preparing for meetings. So how did you marry that with AI?
Yeah, I mean, so all of those things are aided by AI, right? So I'll give you an example. So it's a Monday and I have my one-on-ones on Mondays. So when I walk into my one-on-ones on Monday and, we have a time of recording, we have a long weekend coming up, right? After that long weekend, when I step into those one-on-ones on Monday, it's going to be hard for me to remember what we talked like about the week before and like what I should follow up on. And Fellow's really good. It produces this thing called a pre-meeting brief for each and every one of your meetings. And it's not just like, okay, yeah, I can tell you what you guys talked about, but what it does, which I really like, is it actually tells you what you should follow up on. And what you should follow up on isn't as basic as, hey, here's something they promised to do, like check if they did it. It can go a lot deeper. It can be things like the last time you talked to Daniel, he started to explain this project, but it didn't seem that he had a lot of detail. That's something that you may want to spend some time, fleshing out a bit more with him, right? Now that's really powerful. That would have required me to really consume whatever happened before, step back, think about it, and then based on that, come up with that kind of, basically topic to discuss. And I think that's super powerful, right? Because now AI can not only do the basics of summarizing, but it can do things like reason. And I think that reasoning capability just kind of really makes me feel like I'm on top of my game. Like I am going to go into this meeting and I am going to make sure that in this amount of time, there's so many things that could be discussed, right? But we're going to talk about the absolute highest ROI things that we could possibly come up with during this meeting. And like that kind of thing is now possible because of AI. And of course, like both parties have that ability and we can kind of populate the agenda that way. But yeah, like I think that the reason that people have trouble prepping for meetings in general is because it requires that like reflection and people don't have the time to do it, right? But the process isn't something especially unique. One of the cool things about Fellow, and like this is like very base level, Daniel, what else I would say is like when I go into a meeting with you, there may be things that I want to talk to you about that are informed by my meetings with other people in the organization. Now that's like a next level kind of thing, right? And so, Fellow can help suggest those kinds of things as well. This is kind of like the power of, again, like this AI chief of staff, right? Like I've had a chief of staff and that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be cross-functional, talking to other people in the organization, kind of understanding what's going on the ground, and really Fellow helps you operate in that way.
I think the power of what you just described is in two places. And one is when I use note-taking assistants like Gemini, just recording a Google Meet, it's not good. Like, it doesn't help me prepare. I look at it and it's like, Aydin expressed interest in this project. Great. That's a terrible summary. I'm not going to use that. Did you have to do anything special to get it to reason in a meaningful way?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I think this is where you go from like, the idea of something like a summary to something that is like more a workflow. And I think the power is that if you sat down with a transcript, right? And you sat down and thought about all the different ways that you could prompt this transcript and come up with like very meaningful workflows, like before and after the meeting, and even during the meeting. Like there's a lot of stuff that, like, I bet if we sat down, we could probably think about 30 to 50 different really cool ideas, right? And I think like part of it is, part of our job at Fellow is to do that, right? We're like ChatGPT for your meetings. And so we think of the most useful workflows and we build those in automatically. So the Fellow just does that stuff for you. And then of course, like you can prompt it more and ask other things. But to answer your original question, yeah, like these prompts are not like simple prompts. They're not like, hey, take this and summarize it. I think like we have like our prompts are pages and pages long. And it is a combination of many different things. And it's always changing, right? Because the models are always changing and each model kind of works differently. A reasoning model you would prompt slightly differently than a non-reasoning model, as an example. And so it's just like this active process of like, how do you make sure that this stuff is really good? Especially since for something as basic as an action item, the reason that this stuff is hard is because if you and I go to the same meeting, it's possible that we will conclude two different things from the same meeting, right? Which is why, like, didn't you say you were going to do that? And, people misunderstand each other. And so, and this is the reason why this stuff can become hard and why, like, we really believe in that collaborative approach for Fellow too, as opposed to saying, like, you have your note taker, I have my note taker. And, no, we both have Fellow is the note taker for the meeting. It comes in, it does all these things, and it's this collaborative approach where everybody's on the same page about, the things that were discussed and decided. So the prompting it's not simple. I would say like it can get very intricate and there's so many things you can do. You can feed it like knowledge about the organizational structure, people's roles, the type of meeting it is. You can have like different template types. So for example, on a sales call, you probably want to take notes differently than on than a customer success call. In a call with your executive coach, you probably want a different type of summary. In a customer interview, you probably want a different type of summary. And so there's also the understanding of what is this meeting and what are the best possible workflows that I can apply to this particular meeting. So, yeah, I mean, we think about a lot in order to make this product work really well.
Yeah. The amount of context that you could have from a meeting app seems huge. Like, I've interviewed people who have done meetings specific to customer success calls and trying to figure out, can I upsell this guy? How do you guys bake in context? How do you get that context into the app?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is like we just offer templates, right? So depending on the type of call it is, you can apply a different template. And so I know you've used Fellow before. So there's like an old Fellow definition of templates and a new Fellow definition. The new Fellow definition is more about how would you like us to take notes for this call? Like, what should those notes look like? I'll give you a very basic example that relates to sales, but just to give people a sense. So if you're using like the BANT framework, for example, budget, authority, need, timing, I think is probably maybe I got that wrong, but so if you do something like that, then you want the notes to be taken in that way, right? So now you have the LLM looking for, is there budget, is there authority, and it'll describe those things in that way. So templates do a lot, and depending on when this podcast is released, we're also going to allow you to build your own custom templates, so that you can just decide that for this type of meeting, this is what I want. And that ends up being really useful, right? Say that you have a board meeting, right? And for this board meeting, like you want the minutes taken, but you want it taken in a special way. Now you can provide your prompts and Fellow can do that for you. So that's how we address like just the summary part, but there's a lot more to that as well. Fellow, for example, will do things like update your systems of record, right? If you had this super organized employee, like the greatest employee ever that never made mistakes, never went to sleep, went to all the meetings and didn't get tired, could be in multiple meetings at the same time, which is kind of hard to do. But then it would also update the systems of record. So if you're having a sales conversation, it would update Salesforce. And it wouldn't just do something basic like take the notes and then plug it into Salesforce, but it would update the fields, even the ones that required you to think about it. So, for example, say you had a field in HubSpot or Salesforce that was, what is the likelihood that this company is going to grow in the next 18 months? That's a question you have to you have the conversation, you have to think about, and then you fill out the field, right? So Fellow can do that for you. Like it can think about what the field is, how to answer it, and then basically answer it. Or you have another task management system. It can auto update that. It can, send things to Linear or to Jira. And those are this super organized employee that just goes to all your meetings and is just going to, make things tidy and ready, and all your systems are going to be up to date. That's what it's really about.
Yeah, that's super powerful. There's a lot of automation software out there, but to hook it to your meeting seems amazing. And the other part that I thought was fascinating was being able to cross-reference meetings with each other. That and plus asking big questions like, give me a performance review. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Another way to describe it for all those people who are maybe a little bit more technical, people use Cursor or Windsurf or tools like this to generate code. But LLMs know how to code, right? It's not like these tools have taught LLMs to code. But what these tools do is provide the LLMs with context, and they allow you to do and build the workflow so that the context is there and so the LLMs can do their job better. We think that meetings just have a lot of context. And so the thing that Fellow helps you do is provide the context to the LLMs. And, for Fellow, again, if you think about it, most things in organizations are downstream of meetings. Sure, like it might end up in the wiki or it might end up in a Google Doc, but it was probably discussed somewhere first, right? And then there's and it's a very lossy translation into, most wikis are not up to date. They're basically, not everything makes it there.
I feel personally attacked, but yes.
Yeah, but in meetings, you always have the latest information, the latest discussions. And so what Fellow does is just make those things accessible. And there's a lot of use cases for it, right? So one really cool use case, we have this who's a recruiter who was using Fellow in what I thought was a creative way. So he was having the calls with, say, candidates, and their idea is like they meet a candidate and they're like, this candidate is a perfect fit for this customer of ours. And so then what they did was super interesting. They basically run the meeting and then would use our Ask Fellow feature, which is kind of like the ChatGPT for your meetings. And they would say like, hey, can you describe, here's the job description for this role. Can you basically write an email that explains to our customer, based on this job description and this meeting, why this candidate is a perfect fit for their company?
Cool.
Right? And they literally grab that and then send that to the customer. Whereas now they've made the decision, right? They're like, yeah, this is a good candidate. But the whole, the drudgery of writing it out and explaining to the customer and so on and so forth and doing a really great job at it, now that can be helped by AI. And what I like about that use case is that, say that you were hiring, I'm just going to make up something, but say you're a recruiter and you're hiring like the CEO of PepsiCo, right? Kind of big deal, probably very, hefty fee involved in placing this. So if you were going to do that, you would write like the best email, right? It would be so detailed. You'd put so much effort into it. Maybe you put like a full day of effort to write this email. But, for something that was maybe like an entry-level job, maybe we call it an internship, you're not going to put in that much effort. But with AI, you can make it seem like, even for that, internship that you weren't going to spend a lot of time on, you can make it like it can be as if you were hiring the CEO of PepsiCo. So I think the cool thing about AI is that it just also raises the floor, right? Like the minimum acceptable quality bar. It also creates the opportunity, like it also raises the ceiling in terms of the opportunity of like how deep and how good your work can be. Other examples are like people will do calls with their customers, and then they'll say, oh, take all this stuff, and then here's my requirements doc template, put it in this template format, and then I'm just going to send it to my engineers and get them to start working on it. Right? So there's a lot of stuff that you could do if all of your conversations were readily accessible and that you could just use AI to parse through them.
What have you seen as the biggest bottleneck to being able to use something like that efficiently?
Yeah, what is the biggest bottleneck? I think like most people are not natively
Mm.
tinkerers. And so, part of the job that we have to do as product builders is when we see the really cool use cases, surface them in a better way, right? Some people will, let's go back to ChatGPT. You could use ChatGPT as a search engine. That can be your main use case, and a lot of people like that's all they do. But, as you know, like that's very surface level, right? That's like barely scratching the surface of what you can do. And so as product builders, we have to figure out what are the super high value use cases and just make it easy for people to discover those things and to learn those things. And I think that is a bottleneck. In general, I would say for AI adoption across companies, like the biggest bottleneck is that most of these things require you to, you can get like basic value out of it, but like for you to get like a lot of value, it requires you to change the way that you work, right? So going back to my example of the recruiter, like that's, that email where they explain to the customer how something works, that requires A, creativity, and B, a way to change your workflow. And so, the hard part about that is that it requires you to, think differently about the way that you work and come up with these new workflows. And I think the reason that a lot of people just, and this is in particular to Fellow, this, with AI in particular, is that the reason that it is hard to come up with these new workflows is because you have deadlines and you've got stuff to do, right? So I got to submit this thing by Friday. I know that if I did it the old way, that I'd be able to do it. I can, complete it and it'll be done. Or I can, experiment and try and use AI to get this done. But the problem is the first time I use AI to do this work, it's going to be, it's probably going to annoy me because it's not going to be great. I'm probably going to spend more time on it, and it's not going to be as good as if I did it without using AI, right? Because I've been doing it the other way forever and ever. And so part of it is that like people and organizations specifically have to make it possible for their teams to experiment without deadlines, like actually create the space to tinker
Mhm.
and build in order to kind of like come up with these new workflows. And it will take longer. You will be frustrated. It will require patience. But once you figure out the new workflows and you get really good at it, then you'll never want to go back because it'll be that much better.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that when I interviewed a chief AI officer, that getting people to experiment with AI is hard. And I wanted to shift gears a little bit. What's a deeply held belief about AI that has changed for you through this journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's this I don't know if you've ever had this feeling where, you meet someone and or you see something that is like so far past your expectations that like it almost makes you feel bad because you're like, how did I not figure that out? Or how's this person so good at what they do, like, or this company, this thing that they're doing is so far beyond what we're doing, and you should have this feeling of your mind is blown, your expectations are surpassed. And I remember like in building my last company, maybe I'd feel that once every 6 months, something like that, right? And it was a negative feeling, and I had it like once every 6 months, and it was more of how could I like, how is it that I didn't catch on to that, or how is it that like we're not better at this? And now I feel this probably like once every 2 weeks, I would say, which kind of crazy,
Wow.
right? Because and like this is what I do. This is what we do. We work in AI, and this is our field. And once every 2 weeks, like I feel like my mind is blown in that way. And I've kind of actually reframed it to be a positive feeling because I'm like every time like my mind is blown in that way, it means that like we've learned something pretty important, and it means that we're gonna massively improve what we're working on. So all this to say is like it used to be that like when something was introduced, it would take a bunch of time, right? Like the early adopters would get it, and then it would take a long time. I mean, even I think Kindles are far superior products, but like people still read physical books, right? And there's still people that don't use a microwave. It's kind of crazy, but this stuff is like just it's moving so fast. It's kind of like even changed my belief on like how fast companies can grow,
Mm.
right? There's all these records being set, companies reaching tens of millions, in some cases more than in the hundreds of millions, but like on small teams, right? So it's just kind of like bending the reality for me in a lot of ways. And so the other part is that what's changed in my ability, in the way that I think, is that things are just moving very rapidly. And there's this moment of you just have to believe that things are going to get better.
Mm.
Like you almost have to assume what the next version of the models can do and start building towards that. Because if you kind of build to the capabilities that you have today, you're just going to build an inferior
Mm.
product, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, but yeah, it's just that's kind of a belief you have to have. The other belief you have to have is that the costs are going to rapidly get lower. And so I don't know if you've seen that movie Indiana Jones, but there's this moment where Indiana Jones is kind of like, has to basically cross this kind of chasm, and he closes his eyes and, takes one leap forward and just has to assume that the beam is going to be there that he can stand on. And it kind of feels like that a
Mm.
little bit, right? But I mean, it's a different way of company building. This is just not the way that, I mean, certainly in my last startup, definitely not the way that we used to think about things. So, yeah, it just I think the speed at which things are changing, and just like the belief that this stuff is going to advance much more rapidly, and just like thinking that way. And I think every role in the company changes. It's crazy to say, but like more and more, I think every single role in the company will be different. And so it just requires like a rethinking of how every function in the company is going to work.
Mm. Yeah, that's a big deal. Could you give me an example of when you've had to aim for what the models might do? That's such a big difference from any previous technology that I can think of.
Yeah, a super simple example is like the hallucination thing, right? Like when these things came out, we talked about this internally. It was like this, if you summarize a meeting and you get one fact wrong, and the CEO is going to make a decision based on what the product said happened in this particular case, like the whole thing could fall apart, right? And so that's a really big deal. That is a really big deal and can cause really massive problem. I mean, that's a very, very simple one. But another one right now is just related to, so in other words, like the hallucination problem, again, it's not fully gone, but it's gotten a lot better without us doing, obviously, like we do a bunch of things to make sure that there are no hallucinations, but just the models themselves have gotten a lot better at this too. So that's the kind of thing that was really easy to see. You almost had to look at it, because in the beginning you might say like, yeah, this thing is really cool, it makes cool demos, but it's kind of like a toy because it makes stuff up. You can't really use it in serious situations like this, right? And so that's an example of just assuming that it will get better and that you can solve those kinds of problems. And the other one is just like the how much work do you want the LLM to do, and like what it might cost to do
Mm.
those things, right? And so a lot of I think when we first started building for this stuff, we were like, okay, like what would the cost of this be, and what would the cost of that be, and like does the business model work? Will it function if we do all these amazing things for our customers, and they're using the AI like crazy in all these ways, like they're prepping, they're doing this, they're updating systems, creating highlight moments, like all this kind of stuff, I mean, requires, basically a lot of LLM calls, right? And so that's another example of, well, if you build a really great product and you deliver a ton of value, then customers will flock to it. So there's an element of thinking of it like a customer acquisition cost
Mm.
almost, right? Yeah, we spend more money, but the product is so good and it blows people's minds, then more people will talk about it. And then there's kind of like this faith that like over the course of time, things will get cheaper and you'll be able to, create more margin out of it
Mm.
too.
And one of the fun things about AI is that it does change the roles that people do, like you mentioned. How do you see people changing what they do and maybe even roles themselves becoming obsolete or changing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is changing, and the example I give was like there's a lot of companies that for even basic things like customer support, queries, Intercom is an example, and they launched kind of like early versions of Fin, which is their agent that will respond to customer questions. And even, if you looked at this stuff super early on, you might conclude, okay, it's not there yet. And I think like one of the mistakes that companies can make is to say like, oh, I tried it, it wasn't quite there yet, and then they don't look at it for another year. I think pretty much everything you should relook at every 3 months. Like it's
Yeah.
just like this speed at which things are improving. But like if we just take that, then my thought was like, oh, the most important thing you can do is just create a lot of documentation, right? So it's almost like your team's number one goal should be to create so much documentation because the role now changes, right? It's more about creating documentation that AIs can consume so that they can do the basic things of, answering questions because that's a thing that they can do, right? So this is one way of thinking. And then now there's all these companies they're spinning up, all these startups that are spinning up that help. So then I was like, okay, the humans are going to create the documentation, but then now there's all these startups that spin up that create documentation for your product. Like you give it a login, and then it goes into your product, starts clicking around, and can start creating documentation. So I just think that the confluence of all this stuff is going to be super meaningful. I do think again, it's going to be a while between, before super complex things are going to, everything is going to be able to be solved by these systems. I mean, troubleshooting some things are actually really hard and you have to consider a bunch of things. But I do think in general, will a customer support team of 10 today be like a customer support team of 100 of 5 years ago? Yeah, totally. I just don't see how that wouldn't happen.
Mhm. Does Fellow itself change roles? You mentioned it like a chief of staff, but I feel like most organizations, none that I've worked for, don't have a chief of staff.
I think like the role of a role of what each one of these roles do changes. So for example, I work with an EA, Christina. She's amazing. You chatted with her, right? And the amount of AI that she uses on everything is just crazy. So basically, what I would say is that she probably does the work of 2 or 3 EAs because she's able to use AI. And I think like a lot of our work will change to orchestration. We'll have different workflows and agents and things that we work with, and just each person just becomes that much more capable. And I feel like the work that you do kind of rises above the base level of work, right? So it's very interesting. I was talking to a founder of a company, and they were talking about like this very manual task where they had to like go to all these different pages and then copy paste some things and then enrich the data and then this and that, and then they just use one of these agent platforms and just automated all of that and did something that would have taken 8 hours in like 30 minutes, right? And so it's not like that, it just elevates the work that you do. So I think what AI will do is it will elevate the work that all humans do. And despite the fact that this stuff moves really fast, I think startups are going to adopt it at a crazy pace. Larger companies, just by nature of it's really hard to do change management at larger companies, I do think that they will suffer. And I do think that there's this trend of, how long companies last on the S&P 500 that over the course of time has declined, right? It used to be, I don't know, I think like 60 plus years that you would be in the top 500. And now I think it's like down to 30 years or something. And so I just think that the rate of disruption is going to change. So I think new companies become bigger companies faster and faster.
Mm.
And old companies will, again, it's this creative destruction thing. I just think that is going to be put on steroids.
Is there something that AI has done for you that's the biggest change that you can think of?
I mean, it's in every part of my life. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. Like, I'm obsessed with this stuff. And so there's so many use cases. The thought I had was that, someone needs to tell the story of all the different use cases. And so I'm launching a podcast very soon. Probably by the time this episode is live, podcast will be live. It's called This New Way. And it's all about a show and tell of things that people have done about like they've changed the way they work, and they kind of show their screens and then they walk you through like what they've been able to do, because there's so many use cases. But I'll give you one interesting use case that, I just on a very personal level that I did. So I have 3 kids and twin girls that are turning 9, and they had an argument. Like, they were fighting. My wife wasn't home, and they're fighting, and I'm like, I don't know how to solve this. Both sides seem to have logical arguments as to whose fault it is. Why do I do here? It was something about, you'll get a kick out of this. It was something about one of them gave a toy to the other and then said that they could keep it, and then they changed their mind, and like, it was one of those, right? And I'm like, oh my God, how do I solve the situation? And so I was like, you know what? Here's what we're gonna play. We're gonna do this. We're gonna go on ChatGPT voice mode, and you're each gonna make your case to ChatGPT, and whatever ChatGPT decides is what we're gonna do. Are you guys game to do this? And they're like, okay, yeah, let's do it. So then, ChatGPT voice mode. Hey, you're a very wise judge. You're about to hear like the pleas from, basically my 2 daughters. This is the situation. Go. And anyway, so I'm just like, one by one, you go first. And so they're explaining and they're talking to it, and it kind of does this thing, and it somehow mediates a resolution that I would have never come up with, right? Like, it comes up with this idea of, okay, since you gave that toy and she doesn't want to return it, like, maybe you have another toy that you could give her instead of that. And, hey, like, daughter 2, is there anything that she has that you would want instead of that? And it just came out with this out of the box solution, right? That, maybe I could have come up with, but not really. I thought in the moment it was very clever. So it literally resolved the situation. They were both like, happy, and the parent, it was resolved. And I thought that was mind blowing, right? Just as a really cool tool. And it just made me think about, it can apply to every area of life. And that's just like a basic example. So my mental framing right now is that, is there any problem I have right now? And have I thought about using AI for it yet? And it doesn't matter what the problem is.
Yeah, I love the idea of the podcast too. And so thank you for sharing. I tend to ask people at the end, like, what else would you like to share and how we keep up with you? So love to cross-link to the podcast when it comes out. And how can people stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so, the company is Fellow.ai, so you can visit it there. And I'm on LinkedIn, Aydin Mirzaee. Check me out on LinkedIn. Yeah, otherwise, we'd love to connect with people.
I made this podcast because I want to be the person at the city gate to talk to every person coming in and out doing great things with AI and find out what and why, and then share the learnings with everyone else. It would mean a lot if you could share the episode with someone that you think would like it. And if you know someone who would be a great person for me to talk to, let me know. Please reach out to me at Daniel Maneri on LinkedIn, or shoot an email to daniel@maneri.house, which is Daniel@MANARY.HAUS. Thanks for listening.